So I want to give you an update on the U.S.-China relations and Trump's trade war. As you remember, he threatened 100% tariffs on China. And every time I say that, I'm just like, is this guy for real? Evidently, the markets, though, don't necessarily think so. This was the headline from Bloomberg today. Stocks bounce back as Trump softens China rhetoric. And you guys know taco, Trump always chickens out. And I want to show you a bit of the Korean news because it's different than what you'll get in the USA. In Korea, they actually focus on China's got a lot of power with the rare earth, essentially, right? China makes a bunch of stuff. And then when they ever talk about USA, they'll say, Trump changes his mind, goes back and forth every other day, and tweets out nonsense. They actually do this, translate Trump's nonsense. And I've told you guys about this before. And there it is right there, right? They'll say, don't worry about China. It'll all be fine. Highly respected President Xi just had a bad moment. The USA wants to help China. And when they translate this, my wife and I were actually eating dinner watching it on TV. And the first question my wife asked is, why does Trump want to help China? For real, that's what she asked. Because that was from like literally the translation of Trump's tweet. And it was like really, really bizarre. And so it's so hard to talk about this stuff because like Trump doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times, and all you have to do is just translate it, and then people here just like kind of scratching their head. And so that's why it's no wonder that other country would see China as stronger. Now, the other difference too with Korean news and say the US news is they'll actually show you the Chinese messages in the original Chinese, which is, in America, they're kind of afraid of foreign languages. I know how it is. I'm American. I grew up there. And that's something that I always think is great to get outside the USA. I mean, you guys know this. If you live in Europe, which many people watch the channel do, there are many languages in Europe, and people are kind of used to that. So it's not that weird, say, in Asia. There are different languages in Asia, and we're used to seeing it. So they actually played the original Chinese language and say, hey, this is what's going on. And China's response, I've gone through it before, basically like China's, hey, we don't really want to fight, but if we're going to fight, we'll have to, right? That kind of stuff. Or USA, you're messing with our national interests. The other thing I thought was really fascinating about this stuff too is they go really into detail here. They're talking about AI, or they'll talk about cars, etc. Basically, China has a bunch of stuff that the USA needs. That's basically what it boils down to. And in the sense of, if you watch the American news, they always try to make the case that USA is in a position of strength, and we have stuff that China needs. But what it boils down to is the USA's essentially leverage is we have a market that you have stuff to sell to. Now, here's the thing: what if, and it's not what if, it's actually happening. What if China can find other markets to sell to? It's not actually that difficult to figure out, right? China can sell to Europe, China can sell to Australia, sell to Canada, sell to, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, whatever, right? They have other places they can sell, and the USA is not as important as it once was. And then the other thing that you guys know this, Trump will say, well, we have all the cards, and stuff like that. We have soybeans that you may need. And China's like, well, no, we're just going to buy from Argentina, or we're going to buy them from other places. And so this is actually very different than, say, the U.S. news, which makes sense. And something I was thinking about today, where in the U.S. news, they'll try to say that, Trump is the main character or USA is the main character. But it's very different when you get outside the USA. There are lots of main characters. There's not just one main character in the world. One thing I thought was very interesting, this was on JTCB, or BC, I should say, another sort of Korean news program. This is more of a podcasty thing. They were talking about Trump and taco, and they actually talk in English a little bit. Have a listen to this.
정치를 비즈니스처럼 해요.
그럼 그 던지는 말에 겁먹고 뭐 갖다 바치면 안 되겠네요?
안 되죠. 그러니까 타코잖아요. 트럼프 always chicken out.
일본은 갖다 바쳤잖아요.
지금 후회.
Did you hear it? So they said like business term. He's like, no, taco. Trump always chicken out, right? So literally they're talking about the, things that we're talking about in USA. But that's the difference. And for those of you who've been abroad, again, outside the USA, and something that I really like being outside the USA is you get a combination. I get to see what's happening in USA. I also get to see what's happening around the world, not just USA only focus, which is a big problem in USA. They get to be too tunnel vision and think that there's only one country in the world. There's not. I hate to break it to you. I always make jokes about that, but it is a reality when you get outside the USA. There's more than one language. There are other countries out there. When you check into the markets, it's actually interesting. Morgan Stanley saying S&P 500 sliding between 8 and 11%, and I guess that's if the trade tensions continue and the trade war continues. Again, this is all dependent on Trump. He could change his mind whenever. Who knows? This was also a headline from Bloomberg by the dip. Calls grow louder as China's sell-off scene contained. And honestly, they were also talking about in the financial news, people who shorted the market, if they had any sort of advanced, insider trading knowledge, they certainly could have made a lot of money. The last number that I saw was like, with Trump's tweet, it was like 2 trillion and wiped out of the market. It's so ridiculous, but that's the world that we live in. It's ludicrous. This was actually interesting also. This is from CNBC. I want you to have to listen to their perspective.
Not on that particular post. But based on the response that we're seeing out of the Chinese, it seems as though the Chinese do not intend to back down or change their stance on their rare earths curbs. I think it potentially could mean that they believe that this is a good way to add leverage in these discussions to be able to get more concessions. And from the Chinese perspective, it would be seen that the ball is now in President Trump's court.
Right. So the ball is now in Trump's court as China's, trying to get leverage on him with the rare earth material stuff. Now, it's interesting if you listen to one of the other CNBC people, they're trying to make, again, USA be the main character, and aren't we in a position of strength? And I notice in comments every now and then where people say, hey, Chris, but isn't China suffering and China's suffering, blah, blah, blah. And it's fascinating because I think there must be getting that from the American news in sort of perspective like this. So listen to this, and I want you to hear the response.
There was going to be a move later in the session from Trump, and the way he's been with China in the past, it wasn't surprising at all. He said, okay, we're going back to 100%, market sells off. But I'm just wondering who's in a better position. We've got a labor market slowdown over here, and other a government shutdown.
Yeah.
We've got our own problems, but I would venture that in China things are even worse with thousands, tens of thousands of manufacturers that are going to be hit with this.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's obviously a very big concern for the manufacturing sector. People are generally not feeling very good about the economy more broadly. But when you look at, say, the export numbers from today, there were two things that people were taking away. One was that they beat expectations, that the factories were actually doing generally okay. But the other thing that I think was more important is that only 10% now of direct shipments come from the United States. So we're already seeing that the Chinese have been trying to move away from relying on the U.S. And then the Chinese government, at least the negotiators, are quite good at figuring out what the pressure points are for President Trump specifically. So we're seeing that with the rare earths, something that he was concerned about, and then also the soybeans, because soybean imports are now at a record high here, and none of them are coming from the United States. So, you could see how the Chinese are kind of steering the negotiations away from what maybe President Trump had prioritized in the past, which is fentanyl, as well as the trade deficit.
And I thought that was actually really big. As she said, soybean imports are really, really high in China, and none of it's from the USA. So this idea that when Trump's like, oh, yeah, we got all the cards and we're going to use all our leverage on China, I wouldn't necessarily count all of your cards too soon, Trump, or I guess I wouldn't necessarily bet the farm literally on that kind of stuff, because as I keep telling you guys, and that's why I give you a different perspective, there are other countries in the world other than just the USA. And when Trump has the USA in decline, because think of it this way, if the USA's bargaining chip is we got a bunch of consumers who are going to buy a bunch of stuff, right? If that's your main bargaining chip, okay, what happens if Trump's strategy, economic policy is to fire everyone, right? What happens to your biggest leverage? And, people all around the world can see the American news. We're not stupid. we can see literally you're firing people. And so like, if you're trying to convince other countries that your strength is consumers, but the consumers keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and your economic policy is, I guess, tilted towards billionaires. So to be fair, maybe people who build yachts and any sort of, things just for billionaires, I guess, build mansions or whatever, maybe that kind of industries are going to do great. But for a lot of other industries in the USA, meaning consumers, maybe not so much. So that's my thoughts on this. I'd like to hear yours. I do appreciate your time, and I'll catch you all in the next video.